One of the greatest effects of the counterculture is that it revealed cultural taboos that people hadn't been very aware of earlier in time. They were taboos, but they were unwritten rules. And perhaps the first place that became evident was in the sexual revolution. During the early 1960s, tremendous challenges took place against the rigid standards of American society. Back in the 1950s, the most radical films that challenged codes of censorship were radical only in that they used four-letter words like rape or contraceptive. These were grounds for banning films in the 1950s. Now you have new filmmakers who are going to be much more fundamental in their challenges to values. Of all the years that seems to characterize the sexual revolution, it's the year 1964. It's the year of the topless bathing suit. It's the year of the first single-only weekend at hotels. It's the year of the first topless bars. Suddenly, values are shifting. The counterculture is revealing the prudery and repressiveness of American sexual values. In 1960, it was largely inconceivable that couples could cohabitate outside of marriage. By 1970, the number of couples cohabitating outside of marriage had quadrupled. A fundamental shift had occurred in American values. And at the vanguard of that shift had been the counterculture, which had viewed marriage as a trap, as a set of restraints on both women and men, and had longed for more relationships that weren't constrained by law, but were based on trust and emotion. For example, in 1962, the state of Illinois became the first state to decriminalize all sexual activities between consenting adults. And in subsequent years, most other states would adopt the same values. No-fault divorce laws were passed in most states during the late 1960s and then later in the early 1970s, making divorce less an adversarial proceeding. In other words, what you're seeing, I think, is a relaxing of the more traditional social restraints that we associate with the 1950s. For the first time, it became possible to have a fulfilling sexual and social life outside of marriage. Prior to the 1960s, to be a bachelor meant to have a life of deprivation, unless you were very rich. It meant to eat corned beef hash out of cans and to live in squalor. But increasingly, the popular culture began to popularize a new image of what it was like to be single, free, I guess summarized by the Playboy philosophy, that marriage is a state that you become imprisoned in, and that to find real fulfillment, you have to be out on your own. One of the major changes that occurs in the early 1960s is that women start to marry much later than before. Instead of marrying at 17 or 18 or 19 or 20, the marriage rate age rises. Now, it simply rises to the historical norm. It rises to the mid-20s. But it meant that women were having fewer children, and they were having them later in their lives, and it meant that there was a growing period when people were single and mature and outside of a family. This was a dramatic break with the past.